Greetings from San Diego Comic-Con at home. My name is George Gustines, and I write about comics for the New York Times. I'm super excited to be here today talking with Chris Ryall and John Barber from IDW, where we're going to get to learn what the company has coming up in the next few months.
Yeah, I'm Chris Ryall. I'm the publisher, president, and chief creative officer at IDW. And George, back to you. Thank you for doing this with us.
This is great. I always look forward to these things, and since we've been stuck working at home, this is a nice break from the wear and tear.
I'm John Barber. I'm the editor-in-chief at IDW, and also glad to be here with you, George. Good to meet you.
So I've written about IDW before, and I sort of have a strong sense of like Marvel and DC are about superheroes, Image is about the sort of independent properties. How do you think IDW stands out in the marketplace?
I mean, it's funny, like we talked about this when we hit our 20th anniversary last year, like where do we see ourselves going, you know, for our next 20-year run? And it's largely the same. Like a lot of the way IDW set itself up was to be the alternative to Marvel and DC. I mean, we've dabbled in superhero projects here and there, but for the most part, unless we're doing things like with the Marvel Adventure line or the Marvel Action line, we've tended to stay away from that because Marvel and DC do that kind of thing so well. So we've always tried to offer a broad alternative to any other reader of comics, whether that be all ages material, fans of old comic strips and archival art books, you know, more adult genre fare, like a lot of the horror things that we've done. And, you know, really anything in between. It was more of just, we want everybody who has interest in any kind of graphic novel and comic book storytelling, whether that be the things I just mentioned or, you know, nonfiction projects, you know, more personal independent projects like the Top Shelf line offers. It's just, we wanted to make sure that all of those different kinds of things had a real home in this marketplace. And I think, you know, going forward into 2021, that's still our plan, is to do more of the same.
The nonfiction line is really interesting to me. I think I may have broken that news for the Times when you announced the Smithsonian Comics. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of furthering the efforts that we made, or the strides that we made through books like Congressman John Lewis's March series or the George Takei graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. You know, we really saw that not only are those kind of stories, you know, the nonfiction stories, things that are relevant to readers, but they're also things that just, you know, they're things that this kind of stories we want to tell and we want to focus on and spotlight more and more. And so the Smithsonian partnership is really a broad extension of that, because that now gives us access to not only having our books in places like all the different museums and institutes that they have, but also being able to collaborate with Smithsonian experts to tell these stories, you know, all kinds of historical stories that are important and worth elevating in different ways or worth telling through the graphic novel format. And so that partnership is going to take all kinds of different approaches, some of which will be coloring books aimed at, you know, younger readers or colorers or what have you, and then all the way up through different kinds of graphic novels that, you know, re-explore historical events as they've been taught in schools, but maybe aren't necessarily the real history. You know, sometimes the history that we're taught isn't a proper or truthful portrayal of that history. So these books are going to allow us a really nice opportunity to work with historians and graphic novel storytellers to sort of recast these events and look at them from all sides, and, you know, and just make sure that the stories that people are being taught really cover all the nuances and ins and outs of everything. So, yeah, I mean, we're excited about just all the different kinds of things that we have planned and just the breadth of storytelling opportunities that working with Smithsonian offers.
I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about it too is like kids growing up today. Like I've got a 9-year-old daughter, and they don't see a difference between a comic book or a graphic novel and like a regular book. Like it's just part of their repertoire of what they read. And I think there's something immediate and direct about a graphic novel telling these nonfiction stories that I think can be really appealing to young readers, as well as, you know, readers like me, as well as older readers. You know, there's a personal connection with it that you maybe don't get from some other mediums, and that I think can really draw you into the history in a cool and unique way.
When we first went to, when we were talking about this partnership, some of us went out and visited the Smithsonian and walked through some of their new exhibits in DC and everything. And just the idea that the amazing curation they do for those exhibits could then be brought to life in graphic novel form. And so people that, as you inevitably work your way through the exhibit and end up in the gift shop, instead of buying some trinket or t-shirt or something that sort of reminds you of that experience, you can now take home another piece of it and dig into that history in even more in-depth and personal ways. You can spend time with the story of the things that you just walked through in the museum. And so it's really a nice way to get this kind of content in front of readers that, maybe don't see enough of this in their comic book shops or just don't have as much exposure to this kind of material. So it's very exciting for all of that, just as a way to reach and expand our audience.
Do you have a sense of when the rollout will begin, or is it too soon?
Starting this fall, I think the coloring books will be a couple of the things that come out first, because those are much easier to pull together. I mean, maybe the artists on those books don't agree with that, but they certainly don't require as much vetting and sort of research and background and everything to make sure that the actual stories and the graphic novels we're telling are, accurate. And we also then want to make sure that Penguin Random House, the book distributor, has time to really make sure that they are positioning and marketing and selling these books in the right ways across all the different channels outside of the comic market. So I think this fall we'll see the coloring books, and then the graphic novels, different lines of those books will start to roll out after that.
That's great. Is IDW also going to be publishing books in Spanish as well?
Yeah, that was the thing that we announced. I think you and I might have talked about it in New York last October, but it's hard to remember on all of these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, starting later this summer, we're going to be putting out some North American Spanish language books as a way to serve, it's a massive readership and a massive audience that, is Spanish speaking at home. And so just more and more, it became very glaring to us that there is not enough content that gives readers, in North America, the same kind of content that they can read in their native language. And so books like They Called Us Enemy, which, I think we've all seen is still sadly a very relevant and topical story for people on the border and people who have had their families similarly affected. And so I think it's very important for them to be able to read, the George Takei story and realize that as terrible as these things are, they can be survivable, and you don't have to have your whole life defined by these terrible incidents. And so to let people be able to read that story, in Spanish language is very important. And then, we also want people to be able to have fun and have access to the other things that they like. So Lock and Key and Sonic are a couple of the others that will be in this first wave. And then, it's certainly our plan to, going forward, make sure that more and more of our books are available, in this market in Spanish as well as English. And then we're also talking about, from there, what are the other languages? What are the other audiences that are too long underserved and should also be offered books that can speak to them more directly? So yeah, it's an initiative that's important to us and something that I think is going to be very broad as we go forward.
It's really exciting. I can't wait. I think there is a big market for that. So it'll be interesting to see the audience that develops.
And I mean, we've seen some of these books, because there are foreign language editions available through other publishers in other countries. There are fans that have gone out there and found those books, but it's hard for them to get. And so we want to remove that difficulty and just make sure that they can get those books when they want to read them.
Can you tell us anything about Lock and Key or other of your ongoing series and what's going to come up with them?
I mean, I'm always happy to talk about Lock and Key. In fact, just this past week, we approved the first issue in a new miniseries we're doing called In Pale Battalions Go. It's another one of the sort of offshoots that digs back into the history of Key House and other generations of the Locke family. So this one is set right at sort of the outset of World War I, and I don't really want to spoil it, but it starts in Canada. It ends up in abroad, in some serious war zones, and ends up back in Key House. And it all makes sense in the context of the story. And it's one more cautionary tale of you know, people that maybe don't understand or appreciate the magic that the keys can offer can sort of go both ways. Like they're not maybe always just magical instruments, but they can also be instruments of war in their own way. And so yeah, it's a really fun, engaging story. There are some new keys introduced, and just like the research that Joe has done to ensure accuracy in the World War I portrayals, and the way that some of those battles and things sort of come to Key House in a really unique, interesting way is not only exciting for what that story is, which started as 2 issues and then became 3, but those 3 issues are very much a direct prequel to this this big crossover that we announced that we're doing with DC this fall, which is a 2-part Lock and Key Sandman crossover that again is by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez. But you know, it was a story that Joe first pitched to Neil Gaiman a few years ago and said, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" Which is the way most of these things start out. And Neil said, "Absolutely, that's a story you should tell." And it has very direct ties to the Season of Mist storyline in Sandman, and also makes a lot of sense in the context of things we've already seen in Key House. And then all of that combined also plant some seeds for what Joe was just saying on social media, is a story that he probably won't get to for another 5 years. But I think the exciting thing about that is that there are at least another 5, 6, 10 years of Lock and Key stories that, you know, he, Gabe, and I all plan to tell. So that first issue was planned for a little sooner this summer, and then as everybody's schedules, you know, imploded during this whole virus shutdown, the first issue is now August, so it rolls out August, September, October, and then right into the Sandman crossover. And so those issues all combined, when they're done, will make up the Golden Age, which is a long gestating collection of all of these different historical Lock and Key one-shots that fans have been very eager to see us collect in one book.
Have you seen a rise in the sales of the collected editions since the TV show?
Yeah, we did. We saw really, really nice numbers. And it's funny because at times you think, all right, surely everybody that loves Lock and Key already has Lock and Key. And then the TV show hits and it reaches an audience that, you know, maybe was never even familiar with the graphic novel. And so it not only hit, you know, with the show launching in February, but then when bookstores and comic shops largely shut down, that became a thing that I think a lot of readers really wanted to get their hands on anyway. And so that was probably that and the Beauty of Horror coloring book line were our 2, you know, really big, strong sellers during this, you know, initial shutdown. So yeah, we've seen a really big spike, which is, it's great. Like, I want everybody to read Lock and Key because I kind of hold that up there as just one of the, you know, seminal graphic novels in the past few decades. And so I'm really happy that it's found this, you know, ever-growing audience.
I was really smitten, I guess, last year when the new G.I. Joe series started. And I might get my geek card taken away from me, but I think I read maybe one G.I. Joe comic before that. And now I love the series. I sort of love like them as the underdogs trying to take back the world. Do you have more plans for G.I. Joe or your other books like the Transformers or Star Trek?
No. I'll let John jump in there before you just say your comic geek bona fides, bona fides are so well established that you don't have to worry about ever losing the card.
Yeah, no, so no, I love the series you're talking about by Paul Allor and Chris Evenhuis. I mean, that's been one of my favorites too. I think they've had such a unique and cool take on what you could do with G.I. Joe in the modern age. You know, I mean, I'm the opposite. I've been a G.I. Joe fan since it first came out. That was really probably the comic that got me into comics. Well, I say probably, it was the comic that got me into comics. So I have a high opinion on on what you can do with a G.I. Joe comic, and I think you know, Chris and Paul have nailed it, along with like I do have to shout out, like Michael Kelly at Hasbro was instrumental in putting this one together. He's been a longtime partner, but this was a book that meant a lot to him. We've got an issue coming out, I believe it's the next issue. I've confused myself by trying to memorize like a couple hundred books when they're supposed to come out and what's in them and what their status is. that deals with PTSD in a real meaningful way, like in which we've touched on a number of times in G.I. Joe, but this is another what's the right way to say it? Like a different take on how the events that you're seeing affect these people. Because the story in it is these are sort of ordinary people who have a skill set who get pulled into a G.I. Joe team, as opposed to being people who come from military backgrounds. And it's in a world where Cobra is basically one. And so we'll be seeing we have a special that's going to round out the what would have been the first year of story if it wasn't for COVID hitting. I believe that's coming out in I believe that's September, and that sort of is the season 1 story, of those Joes. Our other big G.I. Joe thing we have coming out is the Rob Liefeld Snake Eyes Dead game. That was actually just before this, looking over some pages of. I think Rob's got a really good grasp on Snake Eyes and what makes that character cool and fun. Chad Bowers is doing the script on that, and did a real nice job on that. But Rob's running the show on it. And it's just it's a wonderful, exciting series. My one of the things I love about IDW, and you were talking about that earlier, is just the breadth of material that we publish. Because that was always the sort of reader I was, as somebody that would walk up with, like a Seth graphic novel and a Rob Liefeld comic up to the counter at my comic book store. I just love all these, no pun intended, extremes in comic storytelling. And so I'm very excited about this one too. It's a very different take on G.I. Joe. And of course, we'd always be lax if we didn't say that Larry Hama, who's been there at G.I. Joe throughout the modern interpretation of the characters, is writing Real American Hero, month in, month out, COVID notwithstanding. But that's still moving forward dramatically. We're in a story that involves all of the G.I. Joe characters. It'll be going into sort of a special missions type story after that. So all that's going on. Transformers, if anybody knows me, I've written a few Transformers comics. I have a little bit of history with the brand. Very excited. We just had a couple calls today about sort of planning out where the next, where a number of different focuses on Transformers are going to be. Series Brian Ruckley is writing, I think, is a really exciting take on it. And they've got, like, Hasbro has some really cool plans for where Transformers is going in the next few years. And we'll also be pushing Transformers into directions that we haven't really seen before with Transformers, and trying to reach, new audiences, young audiences, different people who like the Transformers. Well, we're not, if you're a hardcore Transformers fan, your Transformers are going to be there. Don't worry. So, I think that's always been a cool thing with the Transformers, is that the fans are such a wide range of ages, different parts of the world, every background, every type, everybody you can think of. I think that's been one of my favorite things about working on Transformers, is getting to know so many fans from different places that come from completely different backgrounds and headspaces that all come together with just these, these, well, they're not really robots, but robots that we all care about. I think one of the cool things is trying to introduce more people into it while still being there for everybody that it means a lot to, and knowing how much it means to people.
Somebody asked John and I, one of the panels we did recently, if it was more fun to work on licensed properties or creator-owned books. And I mean, I think those descriptions of those comics right there sort of sum up the fun of licensed books, which is trying to make a G.I. Joe book for everybody that wants any kind of iteration of G.I. Joe. Like, if you want the thing you grew up on, Larry Hama is still doing that thing. If you want a book that is just nonstop sort of crazy action from the guy who, other than John, said the reason he does comics and the reason he created Deadpool is because of Snake Eyes and G.I. Joe comics. You have Rob Liefeld doing this just insane sort of Liefeldian kind of action comic. And then Paul Allor's book is something that is completely different, more real world, more grounded, with sort of deeper meaning behind a lot of things that are going on. And so I think it's just that constant effort on our part to keep trying to find ways to engage readers, even with these characters that they've read for a lot of years. Like, Brian Ruckley isn't a guy who any Transformers fan associated with the brand before, but they've really embraced and really been supportive of his new take on the book. And I think, like I said, that's really the fun part of all of it, is just, finding different ways to mine that same material for different kinds of audiences.
It's really great. And I mean, it's amazing too that it literally spans generations now. So like a parent and a child can enjoy different versions of the same characters.
I got a Larry Hama action figure in the mail that was this thing that was Kickstarter, where the figure and the packaging all looks like not enough to be stealing from a copyright or anything trademark, but it looks very much like an old G.I. Joe toy. And like, there's nobody that is more appropriate or deserving of having their own action figure, I think, than Larry Hama.
That's great. Is there anything about Star Trek you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's another one. It's been a joy to work on. It was kind of right before the COVID stuff hit. We went out. We had a meeting up at a secret location I can't talk about, where we brought together the writers for the Star Trek Year 5 series we do, which is chronicling the last year of the 5-year mission, and kind of leads you from where the series left off to getting to where things are in the first Star Trek motion picture. We had a bunch of writers come up, the writers that are working on the series: Brandon Easton, Jim McCann, Jody Hauser, Colin Kelly, and Jackson Lansing, all came up with Chase Maritz and I to work on the what the last half of that series is going to be. So that was some of the most exciting stuff to see, because we were up there with all the Trek people, and it was just like one of the cool things about working with some of the licensors. Like everybody that works on Star Trek loves it, and that's why they do it. And it was just a bunch of people sitting in a room loving Star Trek and throwing out these ideas. We had star charts. So, you're figuring out where the Enterprise is going. And it was like, well, no, here's where it would actually have to go. And calling out these things you can come back to and touch on these old episodes from the series that had affected everybody growing up. And that, everybody talking about these moments of like when this stuff hit them and became so meaningful to them and really, influenced the way their lives would go. So I'm really excited about coming up in the last half of Year 5, as we come into there. And I think we've got some. I say the last half, and I don't mean that with a sense of finality, because we have some, I think, very cool ideas on where to go after that. That I think people that like Year 5 are going to be very pleased with. As a Star Trek fan since I was like maybe 8 or 9, I'm very excited to see what this next thing is. We've also got a Deep Space Nine series coming out very shortly. It's a murder mystery set on Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is one of the ones I kind of lost track of Star Trek, and then Deep Space Nine pulled me back in. I'm a big Sisko fan. Like he's, I love the whole cast on that series. So I'm really excited to have the first Deep Space Nine comic that we've seen in I think 10 years. Then we'll be following that up with a Voyager series that is really going to kind of focus on 7 or 9 and some of the stuff going on with her. So I'm excited about that. I don't know that we've actually announced that, so that might be a little bit of a sneak peek of something that's going to come out pretty soon.
I'm curious, do you guys have like a go-to Star Trek or Transformers story that you recommend to people who are sort of just picking up the comics for the first time?
I recommend the couple hundred issues I wrote. I think that's a good starting point.
I was going to say, you could have written it. It's fine.
Yeah, in terms of the comic, I mean, for me, there's a couple Transformers ones that I think are really key. That one of them that preceded me working on the series, it was a series called Last Stand of the Wreckers by James Roberts, who would go on to write More Than Meets the Eye and Lost Light. But it was the plotter and artist on it was Nick Roach, who's done a bunch of stuff on Spider-Man, and he's an amazing artist and really talented creator. And it's sort of this sells it short, but it's sort of a Dirty Dozen kind of story set in the Transformers universe. But it's much more. It's about the toll war takes on characters. It's much more philosophical, I think, than that description would make it seem. And I think if you haven't read Transformers stuff, or you are a Transformers fan but you want to go deeper than what you see on some of the other media, you know, I think that's a great one. It shows you how deep this stuff can go. That was really you know, it's kind of been a signpost for us in the years since then to kind of try to match that, you know, with all the stuff that we've done. There's a great Windblade run by Margaret Scott that I also really recommend to people. But even stuff right now, Brandon Easton's writing an Ultra Magnus story that's coming out really soon that my old friend Andrew Griffith is writing, and I think that's a good jumping on point to kind of see just a story that holds up on its own. When it comes to Trek, I really truly love the Year 5 series, and I think if you're a fan of old Trek, of original series, that's a great one to pick up. And then I think our Picard Countdown series that just came out really genuinely ties into the TV show. There's stuff in there that you know, people, there's stuff in there that gets kind of expanded on and shown in the comic in a way that's, I think, very helpful and illuminating on the TV show. It's just, you know, it's great to see some of those characters again. And got a couple characters that show up in the comic that you didn't get to see in the show. Get to see where Geordi was during some of the stuff, and that's always exciting for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of those. I do think the Brian Ruckley Transformers book is a very smart, accessible way for fans who maybe don't know all the Transformers lore to get into things. I think John's run was really interesting. I think James Roberts really sort of brought out the humanity in the characters in ways that hadn't been done with Transformers before. And then in addition to the Star Trek books John mentions, like, I'm still kind of amazed, and I still love that we got to do Harlan and Ellison City on the Edge of Forever as it was originally written and intended. And so that still kind of seems like a fever dream that it was able to come to pass. And then likewise, like, I'd say beyond the Year 5 books, any Star Trek books that either Scott Tipton and David Tipton have written, or in the Kelvin universe, the Mike Johnson stuff that he's done either on his own or with co-writers, it just feels like Star Trek. Like, they just all are very adept at nailing the voices and sort of re-examining the different characters and franchise from, you know, ways that you haven't necessarily seen before, or just, you know, just telling good, interesting stories. So it is hard to pick, because, you know, it occurs to me that our first Transformers book, like, it launched 15 years ago, which is kind of insane.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It makes me feel very old. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the great thing, is that they've all been reinvented and sort of redone by a lot of different capable writers and artists over the years, that there is really something for every possible version of these properties. And hopefully still more to come that really keeps, you know, putting different unique spins on these characters.
That's awesome. We have some questions from fans who posted them on Twitter that I think we should try to get to, a couple of them at least. The first one here is, how will you celebrate Sonic's 30th anniversary next year? We are getting old. How is he 30?
Well, it's funny how many of the different franchises that we publish are all 30-something now. You know, the Ninja Turtles and Transformers and G.I. Joe and Usagi Yojimbo and Sonic and Judge Dredd. So, yeah, John, take it away.
We will celebrate it by going fast, just like this time has gone. Yeah, and we our big plan that we have with it is Ian Flynn, who's been writing our series from the beginning, is going to be leaving our main series, but not going very far. He's going to be writing a series called The Bad Guys, and then Evan Stanley will be coming on to the main Sonic series as the writer artist, and she's been an amazing, you know, part of Sonic for a long time. So that's kind of our big excitement, really shifting things up there. And you know, Sega's great to work with on this stuff, and the Sonic fans are some of the most passionate and exciting fans out there. And I think Sonic, you know, it's funny because you're talking about this being 30 years old, but like, this is kind of the best year for Sonic so far. I mean, it was the last movie a lot of people saw in theaters, and a lot of people saw that movie, and I think people really, you know, it's another one kind of like Transformers, that you know, it's a property that's been, or, you know, it's a character that's been around for a while, and it's a character that's transcended, the origins of the character. You know, like I mean, I love video games. I don't mean anything, you know, to minimize that, but like there are people that have never played a Sonic game that love Sonic. You know, that have grown up reading Sonic or watching Sonic, and you know, celebrating 30 years of that is you know, there's some plans we've got that are a little secret at the moment because there's some stuff that we're working on with Sega. And I think there's some very cool, very exciting things that are going to be going on with some of the characters that we've introduced in the comics, like Whisper and Tangle, that we'll be seeing more of. But yeah, Sonic's 30th. Can't believe it's here, but it's going to be big.
The other thing with Sonic is I get this question nonstop, and I think everybody that works on Sonic probably does too, which is I know that the fans of the previous iterations of Sonic really loved a lot of the characters that, you know, we are not legally able to use, and there's always questions about that. Are we going to? When are we going to? And I never want to be dodging anybody's questions, but it's also not really a question that has an answer right now. So I guess this is just more of an acknowledgement that we hear that everybody wants this, and it's a thing that, you know, we're always happy to deliver to fans what they want to see when we're able to do that. And so I guess I'm just trying to acknowledge that we would love to find a way to do all these different kinds of things in the comics that the fans would like us to do. And so I think, you know, a lot of doors are closed and then opened in comics. And so in a lot of ways, you know, we're still knocking at a door that we will hopefully be able to open for fans someday, if that's any kind of non-answer to a question that you didn't actually ask.
Well, in reading the next question, I realized you guys have led me to read a G.I. Joe comic, the series, because I enjoy that. And you also led me to read my first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles story, because I read the Batman crossover, or both Batman crossovers. And someone was asking if the Turtles and Sonic would ever cross over.
I mean,
does that fall into like a weird?
The one thing IDW has established is that we are very open to crossovers and have been very adept at putting characters together that on paper don't maybe immediately make sense in a crossover, then finding the kernel of sense within that and pulling it out and telling a good story. And so, yeah, I mean, that's certainly one that people suggested before. It's funny, like whenever we announce a license now, whatever it might be, then people are instantly suggesting, well, what about this crossover? What about that? Because I think they know that that's a thing we always like to do, because those are the kind of pairings that really make comics special. You know, it allows you to do things that you could never get away with in other forms of media. So, I mean, there are versions of the Turtles that are very much aimed at the same readership as Sonic. So that is certainly something that would make sense to me.
Did you ever see the Image, the story where Sonic meets the Image comics and Sonic and Shadowhawk are in there? Tone totally works there too. So yeah, no, I think that's I mean, that's some of the fun is you know, both Turtles and Sonic. I mean, Turtles especially are characters that bounce all around to different areas and work in so many different genres. I mean, I think that'd be a lot of fun. You know, I think a lot of the questions people might ask are a lot of like, well, that'd be good, or I can't tell you that. You know, but I think, I mean, you know, there is a natural draw between those two, I think.
When we used to be able to all sit in the same room together, every now and then, like at the end of a meeting, there would be a conversation of just trying to take this property and this ridiculous character and finding a way to, like, how would they meet? What are the circumstances that would allow this to be a workable story? And just letting people sort of brainstorm with it. And every now and then that'll lead to an actual pitch to a licensor of a crossover. So yeah, I mean, in the scheme of ridiculous crossovers that we've batted around, Sonic and Turtles is certainly one of the more sane ones.
Is it difficult to work with the licensed properties? Like, are there a lot of restrictions that are involved, or negotiations? That was my cat. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Yeah, I love that cameo.
I can redo that one if you want.
No, I think when in doubt, always leave a cat or dog in any kind of panel or Zoom meeting. No, I think on licensors, like, it certainly varies from licensor to licensor, but overall, like, we've never had the kinds of stories that I've heard other people tell about licensor difficulties and things like that. Like, I don't know that there's ever been any partner we've worked with who has been more encouraging to all kinds of crazy ideas and concepts and crossovers and events and everything than Hasbro. Hasbro has been permissive and welcoming and, you know, suggesting things on their own side that could be fun for us to do, that we're like, you guys will go for that? Wow. And so I think that's kind of extended across a lot of the licensors. And I mean, a lot of it is you can sort of tell by the license that we stay in business with over years, because they've proven to be good, willing partners to let us tell the kinds of stories that fans are going to be receptive to. So yeah, I mean, I would love to like tell horror stories. Well, no, I wouldn't, because that means they're part of my psyche. But really, like, we've had really good experience with licensors being open to just all kinds of crazy things.
I think like a big part of that really is like the people on the licensor side like aren't like nameless suits. They're people who took these jobs because they love these characters, you know, and a lot of times, I mean, are there things that we've come in and like pitched, and then somebody at Star Trek will say, that's not how that works, you know? Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. You know, I mean, that's really helpful. Like, you know, I mean, I remember I was writing a Star Wars thing, and I got a note from Pablo Hidalgo on something, on a continuity matter. And I'm like, that's cool. You know, like oh, I didn't know that. That's great. Right. I hadn't thought about that. You know, I think that's a lot of the fun with the stuff, is that everybody, you know, everybody cares about these things and wants to see the exciting stuff, and wants to see the fun stuff, and wants to see the stuff that got us into it in the first place, and that made this stuff matter to us, you know, for our whole lives.
And I think rules and parameters are what makes stories and universes interesting. You know, if everything is available or plausible at all times, then there's no storytelling drama. So I think when the Star Trek people or any of the licensors say, that's an okay idea, but tell us why it makes sense in our universe with our established rules, like, that just keeps us honest, you know, and allows you from just doing things that are so crazy that they just wouldn't make any sense. So I love, like, that's why I like licensed comics in general, is just telling good stories that work within the established rules and parameters of any universe is just the thing that makes you work harder to tell a good story.
Yeah, it goes the other way too. I mean, they'll come to us with the crazy ideas, and sometimes, you know, I mean, like it isn't always just you know, like things being thrown at them and them saying no. Sometimes it goes the other way, and it's like, oh, here's a nuts idea, you know, maybe you didn't know you were going to be able to do. Yeah, there's a back and forth in a positive way of just you know, when the stuff's really working, it's just figuring out the right ways to, you know, honor the characters but still tell stories that aren't hung up on you know, they just aren't hung up on the past, or that, you know, they're moving everything forward.
That's great. Chris, I know you and I are both big fans of original comic art, and I'm just curious, like, how does the artist edition program work? Like, is there a set number of books you guys try to publish each year? Does it obviously depend on the availability of the material?
Well, we're planning a 5-week event right now for artist editions that, no, we're not doing that. But we did, so I was talking to Scott Doombeer, who's he's the reason these books exist from us or from any of the other publishers who have borrowed Scott's innovation. But, you know, Scott's made 75 of these books now, and it's all been driven by his ability to sort of be the comic book Indiana Jones and go find all that artwork. And I think he's been more adept at it than just about anybody else, because his background is that he used to be an art dealer. So he knows where, you know, if you're trying to find John Byrne X-Men pages, or you're trying to find, I don't know, Dave Gibbons Watchmen pages, which are otherwise scattered across the globe, he has a really good handle on who owns what and where those are. And so pretty much every book we've done has been driven by that, like his ability to go find enough of the original art. And so yeah, that's kind of where it starts is, hey, I have access to all of this. Does this now sound interesting? And I mean, to us, you know, it's sort of like everybody that we grew up on sounds interesting to us. So then you just try to evaluate which ones are going to resonate with the widest audience. But sometimes you do them just because, you know, Ross Andru's Spider-Man book isn't necessarily, he's not talked about in the same breadth as like John Romita or Steve Ditko, but the people that love Ross Andru's Spider-Man really love it. And so it's fun to do the books that, you know, are maybe not going to have as wide appeal, but you're really going to hit an audience in their sweet spot, in the stuff that they grew up on. And so, like, we have a Dave Cockrum X-Men book that I just saw an advance of this past week. and that's stuff that I know people hold in really high regard, because that's kind of where, that's where the whole resurgence of X-Men started. Even before the Byrne run was Dave Cockrum launching the new version of X-Men alongside Len Wein. And so to collect that stuff in a book for the first time is great. And even more than that, we've been trying, and I know a lot of people have tried and wanted for years, decades, to see the Micronauts material that Michael Golden drew, with Bill Mantlo back in the early 80s. That's never been collected in any form. We now have an artist edition with Michael Golden Micronauts art that's coming out. And so all of that is just based on Scott's ability not only to find the art, but then convince other publishers to let us publish their stuff through IDW, which is, that's a bit of magic in itself, that he's able to convince them that it makes more sense for us to do their material than them. And luckily, places like Marvel certainly have been very receptive and open to that kind of thing.
Well, the books are absolutely gorgeous, so I can't wait for more.
It's like, and it's always the wish list, like, because, we've done 75 books, and yet there's always, we do these panels to talk about artist editions, and then the audience is nothing but hands up going, where's the Art Adams book? Where's the George Perez book? So there is kind of an endless line of great art and great artists that people still want to see collected. So from that regard, like, as long as we can find the stuff, we'll keep making those books.
Yeah, I'll throw in Ramona Fradon. I think she's amazing, and she's still cranking it out, and the work is incredible.
I got a couple commissions done from her as gifts last year, and she was 92 when she did them, and they're gorgeous. Like, her Aquaman now is still as good as her Aquaman was, decades ago. Like, yeah, I agree with that. That's a great call.
It's great stuff. I think we're running out of time, so if you guys have any closing statements, this would be the time to do it.
I guess one quick thing is the Darwin Cook Parker books, they came out years ago, but we just recently reissued the Martini edition, which is kind of like the DC Absolute edition, the big oversized collection of the first couple Parker books. But there's a volume 2 that's coming next year, and it's going to have an all new story in there by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips that they delivered recently. And it's just like, it's one of the first comic stories I've read in a while that really got me choked up. You're like, it's a beautiful sort of tribute to the characters, but also just a beautiful tribute to Darwin. And just the way it's told, it sort of creates a world where you get the sense that Darwin Cook is still out there somewhere making amazing comics. And so, like, that's the kind of stuff, like, all, the licensed stuff, but also all of these archival books and these ways of presenting materials, always what's got me so excited about IDW, just finding ways to do things that, if they touch us, they're likely to touch a lot of other comic fans, because that's why we all do this, for the love.
When is volume 2 supposed to come out?
The midpoint of next year, I believe. But yeah, I can't wait till people can see that story, because Brubaker and Phillips are really one of the best comic teams working, for anybody nowadays.
Yeah.
So just that they took time out from everything else they're doing to do this thing, and that it's just such a touching tribute to the characters and to Darwin is, it's great. I can't wait till people see it.
That's really awesome. John, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm excited about all that. I'm excited about the licensed books, the archival stuff. I'm also excited about a lot of the new voices, the creator-owned stuff. I'm excited about the beeps that my computer will make, but also some of the stuff like Canto, which was a very very well received last year and a great series. We've got Canto 2 coming out. I think we have some interesting stories out there, stuff like Ghost Tree and A Sea of Sorrows coming out sometime next year. There was another one that got kind of COVIDed in terms of a release date, but it's still stuff we're going to have out there. So I'm excited to see that, see new voices, new stories, and to continue to kind of reach out and find new voices and find new people, and keep building that. I think that's an important part of what comics can do, and I'm looking forward to more of that.
That's really awesome. Guys, it's been great talking to you, and I'm hoping that next year we can all do this in person again.
Yeah, George, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Great.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to Comic-Con too for doing this, and for everybody who sat through all of our ramblings here. Appreciate it.
Yeah.